The smell of spent gasoline and day-old garbage assaulted Derek as he stepped onto the street. He always waited till sunset to head to McLeod's. That was when the best prospects were out. Derek had wanted the alcohol almost an hour before sunset, but he knew that if he intended to go to bed with someone tonight, he needed to pace himself. A woman might accept a man's advances if she was drunk, but they would rarely spend time with a strange drunk while they were sober. This was a lesson that Derek had learned early on, and it was likely the only thing that stopped him from being a full-blown alcoholic. His phone chirped, and Derek fished it out hopefully, wanting to see what cutie was texting him so early. He sighed when he recognized Charlene's number, asking if he would be at the bar tonight. Charlene, the one-night stand who wouldn't take a hint. He had slept with her about 5 months ago, and the sex hadn't been worth the constant dodge that he now had to run with her. Despite his better judgment, he'd taken her out a few more times since their hookup, but he had never taken her back to bed again. Derek did not stop for seconds, and as he put the phone back in his pocket, he knew he'd have to cut her off soon. Besides, he had other prospects these days. As he rounded the corner, Derek couldn't help but see the spotlights in front of the old warehouse that had once been the cannery. The man out front was doing his best, but most of the people were heading on past without a second look. Derek could feel the urge to drink, almost as strongly as the urge to bury someone who lived rent-free in his head. But he stopped for a moment as he looked at the sign strung over the door of the warehouse. Derek scoffed as he read it. A truly frightening experience, or your money back. What a bunch of bull crap. The man looked like the titular carnival barker. His jacket was black with red thread to accent the cuffs and collar, not to mention the garish gold buttons that glimmered from the dark coat. He wore a tall black hat and handlebar mustache, and his grin made Derek think he was not to be trusted. He stood before what looked to be a very old and decrepit warehouse, a place Derek had driven by 1,000 times and never looked at twice. Now it was hung with streamers and cast in the buttery light of 2 searchlights. The windows of the warehouse danced with a murky half-light, like a fire slowly burning out, and the lack of screaming and giggling teenagers coming back out the front made Derek wary. This time of the year, an empty haunted house was always suspicious. Come one, come all, see your greatest fears realized, or your money back. Derek turned to fix the man with a disbelieving eye. That so? That's so, young man. Be warned, this haunted house is unlike anything you've experienced before. This house will show you things you didn't know about yourself and tap into what truly scares you. Derek scoffed, but he fished out a 20 and a crumpled 5 and laid it in the box. This better be worth it, he grumbled. The barker smiled toothily as he slid the bills into a lockbox. I can assure you, sir, it will be worth every penny. As Derek went inside, his phone chirped again. He stopped in the entryway and looked down, seeing a picture of an empty stool and asking if he would be there tonight. It was from Charlene because, of course it was. She appeared to be waiting to ambush him at his favorite watering hole. He considered just going home and drinking the vodka he had ignored in the fridge since he'd come home from work, but decided that he wouldn't let her stop him from having a good time. Maybe tonight was the perfect opportunity to break it off with her and make it stick. Derek stepped into the cold cloud of smoke as a nearby fog machine belched its payload and was suddenly surrounded by an active bar scene. It was pretty well done. It looked just like McLeod's, the place he'd been heading. McLeod's was where he often picked up the best trim, and he would likely find himself there tonight sometime. Derek didn't like to go to bed sober, or alone. When he was alone and sober with his thoughts, he inevitably thought of her. He groaned as he walked into the bar, wondering if this was one of those religious haunted houses by Mothers Against Drunk Driving. It had all the earmarks: hazy bar, people milling about, shadowy corners where bad actors waited to jump out and startle you. Derek couldn't believe he'd just given his money to one of these religious nuts and their revival miracle tents. He supposed he couldn't be too angry. The man had offered a full refund when he got out. Derek might as well see what there was to the house and get his $25 back as well. He approached the bar, not imagining they'd have any alcohol, but willing to play along. The man behind the counter was dressed in the usual attire that Thomas always wore. Thomas seemed to love to dress like the old men out of a barbershop quartet. Suspenders, handlebar mustache, striped waistcoat, shiny black shoes, and immaculately coiffed hair. As he approached the bar, however, he noticed something different. His face looked like someone had used an eraser to make it a flesh-colored smudge. He looked up at Derek, silent as the grave, as he stared eyelessly at him. Derek tried to order a gin and tonic, but the not Thomas just shrugged and went back to what he was doing, turning away from Derek as he went back to work. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Derek yelled, but as he tried to reach over the bar and grab the not Thomas by the sleeve, the man walked away and went to serve some other oddly smudged individuals at the end of the bar. They all seemed to have that weird thing going on with their faces. Derek wondered if it were a theme or something, and if so, he didn't get it. He sighed as he sat back down, waiting for the bartender to come back. The smudged Thomas clone was more like the real Thomas than he knew. Thomas had gotten into a fight 3 nights ago, and Derek's reception at McLeod's had been icy ever since. It was Thomas's fault, really. If he wanted to bed Janet, then he should have made his move. Derek wanted her, Thomas wanted her, but Derek had struck first, and now Janet was just another notch on his bedpost. The problem was that when Janet realized that she'd been nothing but an evening's distraction for Derek, she had switched to one of the other dive bars in town. Now Thomas blamed him for running her off. "I don't know why I'm bothering to talk to you at all," Thomas had said. "It's like being mad at a dog for eating your sandwich. He's a hungry mutt, after all, who only knows that he wants to eat." "Seems like the bartender might be a little upset with you." Derek jumped and glanced over at a familiar-looking brunette who had sat down beside him. She was dressed in a short black dress, her leggings artfully ripped and her shiny black hair hung in her face. When she smiled, he could see that the teeth were slowly slipping into unevenness, but he found it charming. The longer he looked at her, the more familiar she seemed and the less like anyone else he had ever seen. "You must have slept with some girl he liked." She was drinking something through a straw with a distinctly fruity smell, but the thickness and the color reminded him more of a bag of blood. As he watched it slip up the straw, he felt a little sick to his stomach. He could see her throat working as she drank, her eyes closing as she enjoyed it, and Derek was powerless to break her stare as much as he wanted to look away. As a trickle ran down the corner of her mouth, he finally found the strength to clear his throat and glance around the smoky bar. This was definitely the oddest haunted house he'd ever been to, and he was beginning to doubt his previous suspicions of a religious experience. Do I know you?" he asked, scanning the bar to see if there was someone else that he knew. The girl was cute, but looking at her made him feel weird in a way that he hadn't in a long time. She grinned as she drank, the soupy sound of the drink disappearing up the straw, making his skin crawl. It was like listening to someone drain a corpse with a bendy straw. "Not for long, though you think about me often enough. In a way, I'm the reason you do the things that you do. I'm never far from your mind." though you wish I wasn't. You can try to drink me away, Derek, but I'll never truly be gone." Derek laughed, but there was no mirth in it. He was thinking that the woman had captured his earlier thoughts perfectly. Do you always talk in riddles to people you've just met in a bar?" He turned back, but something was different about her. Had she been wearing glasses before? They didn't really fit the elegant dress she was wearing. They were thick, like a librarian's, the kind that are more function than form. She was still pretty, but the glasses looked like a prop on the well-dressed young woman rather than something she needed. Only to people who can't understand plain speech. His phone buzzed, and Derek checked it to see that Charlene had sent him another text. She wanted to know how he was, to let him know that she was thinking about him. She was so clingy. Why wouldn't she take a hint? Didn't she realize that he wasn't being coy when he went home with other women? That he wasn't playing hard to get when he didn't return her calls or answer his door? She wanted to lock him down, but he couldn't stay with her. He'd start seeing that body as it lay in the casket, hear her words as she told him she was leaving, and the only thing that would make it go away would be the drink. I'd like to say you've grown into a fine man, but we know it isn't true. You've changed very little since high school, Derek, and I doubt you ever will." "Well, that's something to work with. Did we go to high school together then? Were you some little nerdlet that I never called back? Maybe some one-night stand I ghosted after I was done?" Had she had the pimples when she first arrived? He had only looked away for a second, but she had just the slightest hint of acne across each cheek, like a dusting of freckles. They weren't the livid pustules of a teen experiencing their first crop, but the last light kiss of puberty that an 18-year-old might experience, before they simply dried up and were no more than a momentary problem after that. She smiled as she noticed him noticing them, and he thought again that her teeth seemed odd. Had she once had braces, maybe? "No, we were never intimate. I think you would have liked to have been, but..." She paused long enough to take a sip of her drink, the liquid having returned by some unnoticed bartender. "You were so painfully shy around me. You could speak confidently to any cheerleader or popular girl at school, but you were utterly befuddled by me and my braces and my glasses." Derek was speechless. She couldn't be who she was claiming to be. Lisa was... "I'm sorry," Derek said, glancing over and seeing someone he hoped he recognized. I see someone else I know. I should really say hi to them." He slid off the bar stool and onto wobbly legs that almost spilled him onto the floor. The young woman, younger now than she had been at the start, smiled at him as she showed off a mouthful of metal. "Take your time, Derek. I don't have anywhere to be. I'll be waiting for you. I'm always waiting for you," she said, throwing the last at Derek's back as he rushed off into the small crowd. He thought the woman's name was Cindy, or maybe Chelsea. He only recognized her from the back because that was the most memorable image he had of her in his head. Her blonde hair was still long and soft as it rolled down her back, and when he approached, she was talking with a small group of hazy people. Their faces looked scrunched, their features swirls of eraser marks, and when he touched her, she turned around slowly. "Thank God, Cindy. Did the guy on the sidewalk talk you into this weird little..." But he stopped when he saw her face. Her face was as smooth and featureless as the others, and she took one look at him and walked away without a word. "Cindy," he called, taking a step towards her before catching sight of a familiar brown ponytail as its owner leaned over the bar. Mary was a staple at McLeod's. She might have been a little too old for Derek, her status as a cougar established before Derek had taken his first drink at the bar, but she'd been sweet for an evening. He batted at the ponytail playfully, waiting for her to turn around so he could ask her what the hell she was doing here. She'd been a little icy to him after he'd slept with her, but surely she'd help him figure out what was going on before he had a freaking breakdown. She turned around angrily when he batted at her braid, and Derek saw that she was also smooth and featureless from eyebrows to chin. She huffed and took herself elsewhere, and as Derek watched, he became aware that most of the people in the bar were women who looked very familiar. One-night stands, old girlfriends, sexual conquests of every flavor, and all of them milling about like they couldn't see him or couldn't care less. They pressed in as their numbers swelled, but Derek remembered them all. It was impressive and depressing how many women you could sleep with in a 6-year period, and Derek found that he was adrift in a sea of jaded barflies. They had their own tidal pull, and as Derek tried to push his way to the door, they seemed to pull him back towards the bar with each push he made to escape them. When someone wrapped a hand around his and pulled him back towards the stool, he accepted it without protest. It was the not Lisa, and she looked a lot more familiar now. She wore the same ripped leggings and puffy sweater dress she'd been wearing the night of the party. The leggings were no longer ripped artfully. Derek could see glass shards and torn skin beneath them. The sweater was dotted with red splotches, and he might have thought she'd been shot if he hadn't known what had killed her. The left lens of her glasses was a spider web, pristine ice broken by a stray rock. And he did remember that. After all, they had buried her in those glasses, and he remembered it being the only thing imperfect about her as she lay in her casket. It was the only thing real about her after the coroner was done making her beautiful again. "Why are you here?" Derek asked, watching the throng of women as they surged around the bar he was sitting on. "It's not enough that I live with your ghost every day. Now I have to see you too?" "Oh, gee, I'm sorry that I'm the stick you jab yourself with on every occasion. Unfortunately for you, I'm your greatest fear. Not me, not really, but what I represent. You can't let yourself be close to anyone, not like you were with me. You can't open up and embrace intimacy. In a way, I am the manifestation of your issues with intimacy. You bury your fears and woe in an endless sea of sex, and you're never satisfied. No matter how much you drink or how many women you go to bed with, you'll never lose my ghost, not until you let yourself forget me." His phone buzzed again, and he saw that Charlene had texted him. Her message was a little different this time. She told him how very sorry she was that she had bothered him so much, and how she'd stopped trying to insert herself into his life. She apologized for not being enough for him, and hoped he had a good night. Derek looked at the phone, feeling his stomach knot as he thought about how he had run off another one. "She seems nice. Maybe you could give her a chance." "I can't," Derek said. "What if I let her down, like I let you down? What if I accidentally kill her, too?" Lisa smirked, and it did interesting things to her broken face. "You blame yourself for my death, but did you really have anything to do with it?" Derek scoffed. How would he not caused her death? He'd been too focused on drinking and partying to make sure that his girlfriend got home safely. He had stood right there and let her leave with someone else, instead of taking her himself. "Why do you think that's your fault? I would have left regardless. You no more caused my death than the tree we hit did. Let it go." Derek could see that night, the same night he always saw when it haunted his nightmares. They had been at Marty Jenner's party, the one he held before Christmas break every year, and Derek was drunker than he'd ever been. Lisa didn't drink. He had dragged her to this party, mostly so he could show off his new girlfriend, and it was clear that she was done with it. When he tried to kiss her, she had pulled away, telling him that his breath smelled like rotten fruit. He had told her not to be such a prude, and she had told him that she was leaving. Kyle Warden, one of the guys on the football team with Derek, had also been leaving. He was less drunk than Derek, but that wasn't saying much. Derek had been hung over the next day when her mother called to give him the bad news. Kyle had wrapped his vehicle around a tree 3 blocks from his house, killing both of them instantly. Derek had never forgiven himself for that, and he'd stayed pickled for the rest of his life. Looking at Lisa now made him feel even worse. "Forget about it. Forget about me," she said. "Stop torturing yourself. You had nothing to do with my death. Let yourself be happy. And let go before it's too late." She swam before his eyes, and it was only then that Derek was aware he was crying. His phone chirped again, and he saw that Charlene was calling this time. As he picked it up, he saw the women part, leaving him a clear path to the exit. Give her a chance, a real chance. Let yourself be happy for a change. Derek left, apologizing for being so distant, as he and Charlene made plans to meet up at McLeod's in a few hours. "So," said the barker, as Derek stepped back onto the street, "did you discover something truly terrifying?" Derek nodded. "Yeah, I think I might have also found something I'd lost, too." He dropped another 20 into the box as he walked, and the barker smiled as he watched him leave shakily. Another satisfied customer. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.